Good?
Yep, we should be good in just a second. All right, good to go.
I'd like to call to order this special Board of Finance meeting scheduled for March 9th, 2021. I'd like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, do we have any public comment?
Glenn, actually, can I call the
Oh,
special?
go ahead. I'm sorry, Rose.
Yeah, so I'll call the special meeting of the Brookfield Board of Education to order. And we have the same agenda, so you can go ahead and lead the way from here.
All right, sorry.
No, it's okay.
All right, do we have any public comment?
Just one thing, we have the Board of Selectmen here too, so I'll call them to order. We don't have an agenda, but let's just make sure. But Sue and Harry, we're going to join. But go ahead.
All right, public comment. All right, hearing none. We'd like to thank the Board of Ed for all showing up tonight and coming to present to us. So Rosa, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Because we have Paul Checco here from the NBC, do you think it would be, can we just start with, speaking about capital and the boys locker room project? We anticipated those being discussion points, so.
Absolutely, go ahead.
So if you want, I think it might be beneficial for Joy, the chair of the Board of Ed Facilities Committee, to kind of walk us through the timeline since we were last at this point last year. So it might be helpful for her to kind of walk us through the timeline, and then obviously Paul can answer any details and talk about the future of the project. So Joy, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to walk us through that.
Sure, great, thanks. Good evening, everyone. So first, I think it's important to take some time to really highlight and go over the process we've really embarked on this past year and the steps we've taken and explored to get us to this point. I think it's also important to mention that, our facilities committee has really thoroughly questioned and reviewed all the data, the proposals, and the plans for the boys locker room project. We followed through on recommendations, looked for efficiencies. So I will take some time to go through the timeline of the events that will include our engagement with Tecton and collaboration with the NBC. So just a quick brief history. In 2018, 2019, it was approved to fund $50,000 for the design phase. $500,000 was a placeholder that was put into year 2 for 2019, 2020. The current budget plan was $605,000. In January 2020, the Facilities Committee was given an update on the boys locker room project. Tecton shared the design, cost estimates, and alternatives. 8,500 square footage, about $150 a square foot. Total proposal was $1,322,824. And again, $605,000 was built into the capital plan. In February and March, the Facilities Committee took a tour of the locker room. We asked questions. We sent questions to Eddie from Tecton for clarification of many items. We discussed possible state funding, discussed other possible storage spaces. We discussed the lack of handicap accessible plumbing fixtures. We discussed possible phasing of the project. We did feel, and we came to the conclusion that it was not fiscally responsible, and we assumed that it would cost more if we did it through phasing the project. We reached out to Steve Baldwin with a slew of questions, and we received pages and pages of data back from Steve regarding, usage for sports, the PE classes, the curriculum, PE curriculum, the community, and problems with the locker room, health concerns, et cetera, that he had. In April, we presented to the Board of Education. And on April 8th, we presented to you, the Board of Finance. The next day, after presenting to the Board of Finance, I reached out to Mr. Dunn, Mr. Checco, and the NBC as requested by the Board of Finance. I reached out and answered questions to Mr. Mulvaney, and Mr. Checco and Mr. Dunn discussed the project together as well. On April 23rd, I had a conversation with Paul Checco, who clarified a lot of the backstory, history of the project. He too spoke with Mr. Baldwin and Dr. Burrill, and we all collectively were of the mindset that the work needs to be completed and should be completed in its entirety. On April 29th, Tecton reached out to Barbara Fabiano. She's an architect of school construction grants and review Department of Administrative Services. She did respond at length that the modifications to the existing locker room is not work for which state grants apply. In June, the Facilities Committee reviewed the NEASC recommendations that we brought forth in the presentation to you on April 8th. We asked for clarity on them, and we discussed it as it related to the 10-year capital plan. In September, I reached out to Tecton and requested a hard proposal and a contract. On September 14th, Paul and I received the proposal for documentation, bidding, and construction administration services and fees for the locker room. On September 15th, Paul confirmed review of the proposal and requested a few changes and modifications. In October, we received the fee proposal from Tecton of the professional design services. In November, the facilities meeting happened, and when we revisited the locker room project again, the committee as a whole supported putting the entire project in year one. There was also some discussions with Mr. Dunn, and he stated that if it needs to be in year one, put it in year one, and he wasn't opposed to it. And then January 2021, on January 13th, Paul Checo and the NBC and Tecton walked through the space to address questions that were raised, and items on the current design plan were clarified. Tecton came back with answers from the NBC. So on January 19th, NBC received a presentation of the renovations. Important points that they mentioned was that it needed to be updated to reflect the current bidding environment, as well as the revised scope, incremental costs for additional plumbing fixtures in the coach's office and exterior use toilet rooms. Savings are expected with reduced scope for lockers, ceilings, and structural work. And they had mentioned that work may be phased, taking place this summer, 2021, and or summer of 2022. On January 27th, the facilities committee had a meeting, and we invited Paul Checo and Tecton to attend. We discussed the NEASC recommendations again and fully reviewed the NEASC recommendations and how that aligns with our 10-year capital plan. We reviewed the completed jobs that are still in progress, and ongoing projects, specifically in the capital plan that the NEASC referred to. And that brings us to February. On the 13th, NBC and Tecton did a walk through the locker room with the goal of finding efficiencies to help the overall cost. Some of the cost reduction measures that were discussed and brought to the forefront were as follows. The lockers, we found out they determined that they're in good shape and most can be used, just some have to be refurbished or repaired. The coach's office, we can use the existing door frame and take off the pane of glass and put a door. The outside access toilet areas, that would be the ones that are accessible to the public, making standardized showers and not as big as ones that were previously proposed. The training room, we no longer needed to put in a structural beam. And the ceilings, they wanted to maintain the skylights or natural light and use a spray insulator. And then we're into now March. Actually, before that, so on February 28th, we received Tecton's fee proposal for the professional design services, a brief summary of the scope of the work and the fee for those services mentioned above. So the total cost of the project is $1,315,329. So that's about $7,495 less than original. And then March, so recently, Paul, Steve, Baldwin and I did another walkthrough of the locker room to gain a better understanding of the proposed changes. We discussed, additional storage possibilities, possibly a pulley system in the weight room for the storage of the wrestling mats and other items. We looked at points of entry with the outside access toilet areas and the filling station closet with door placement. And then brings us to tonight, our meeting with the Board of Finance. So that's the timeline, a little bit over a year ago. From January when I was given the position of facilities chair. I don't know if anybody has any questions with that specifically, the timeline. Or Paul, you think I left out anything?
No, I think it was really thorough, Joy. The only clarification I'd like to make is in February, the fee proposal, it's not a fee proposal we received from Tecton. It was an updated estimate. I just want to be clear
Okay.
that they're not giving us a proposal to do the work. That was their updated estimate for the costs.
Okay. Any questions from the Board of Finance?
I just want to know if people can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Okay.
And Steve, you left this in the budget, correct? The Board of Selectmen left this project inside the budget and approved it.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
So it fits in the plan, Marcia's 10-year plan that, or your 10-year plan that Marcia puts
Yes.
forth.
Yes, it does.
Okay. So go ahead, Ricky. Do you want to say something?
Oh, no, I think it just picked up my writing. Sorry.
Okay. So then what would be the next step, Paul, if this gets approved now in this budget?
If this were to get approved in this budget, we would like to work with Tecton to fast track this project to get it on the street and get bids back to see what we can accomplish reasonably in this summer timeframe. If we go much beyond the end of April, by the time you bid, let, award, and everybody mobilizes, we'd be hard pressed to get a good portion of this work done this summer. Look, we don't know what the market's going to hold. We just had a really good response and a really good favorable market on the new school project. We're excited to see if this would follow in the same path, given that we're not too far off that bid process. But if this were to be protracted and go out any further, we have to take a look at what escalation will be in the next year for the construction index. And it could go up, it could go down. We don't know yet.
Well, Paul, even the Board of Finance approves it, it's not going to be approved until the middle of May.
Right, but what we can do, knowing that the Board of Finance has approved it, you go out, you bid the project, and you make the letters of intent contingent upon the town passing it at budget referendum, which would be the middle of May. School lets out somewhere around mid to late June. We can make plans in that short of a time if the contractors are on board.
Would you get a full bidding process with full participation going prior to town approval, or would people sit on the sidelines because they have better things to do, known projects?
Well, there's always that caveat in there that that the award of the contracts is contingent upon voter authorization of funds.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon in the state of Connecticut or in the state of New York for that matter, though.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, do you guys feel like this is the best locker room plan to put forward? Like, are you guys comfortable that this is going to be, for 1.3 million, the best plan forward? Or do you think there's a better plan for more? Like, I just want to make sure that we're putting this out to vote, that you guys agree this is the best plan for the locker room.
I appreciate that question, Ricky. And we always try to weigh the cost versus what you're gaining for a project. Could we put out a $2.5 million locker room project? We could. Would it net a substantial gain in program? And really at the heart of it, that's what this is about. It's about expansion of program and fixing up some existing facilities. I don't think that the cost versus gain on a $2.5 million scale is that much greater to substantiate a plan of that magnitude. Here, I think we're accomplishing a couple of long-term items that we've wanted. One is access of toilet rooms from the fields for both genders that are going to be handicap accessible. Right now, and I know it hasn't been this year because of COVID, but right now we generally use porta-sands. And we have to take a look at what we spent on porta-sands over the last 20 years out there and say, fine, we're not going to be spending that again. This accomplishes some separation between team rooms and offers a visiting team a locker room to use when they come, and separation. And the separation is as simple as putting a door back in the existing frame. It's no great shake, but it also does separate it out so that when the girls have use of the fields, they can come in and from the hallway access ice and the water supply and not go into or potentially go into a boys' locker room, which they don't do now. But a male has to go and fill up the water jugs. So there are, a lot of little issues that are fixed by this, in addition to the expansion of program to a cardio health center, which.
Yeah, Paul, I was just going to interject. I'm sorry to kind of piggyback off that. I was going to say, you can't put a price tag on the cost savings of enhancement to our cardio and PE program and curriculum and athletics. This is invaluable. It's not just a locker room. We're enhancing our curriculum. It's about the education. It's also serving the community, especially in the current environment with COVID. This is a crucial move. I mean, we're having people share one porta-john outside. So that adds another layer of it.
It does. And like many of you, I wake up every day to a daughter going to high school from the comfort of her bed. And, covers pulled up to her chest and the laptop on her lap, and getting the students back out and in a routine and reteaching them cardio and exercise, I think moving forward is going to be even more crucial than it was in the past. So Ricky, I think that was a really long answer to a short question.
No, you answered my question. That makes a lot of sense. Appreciate it.
Mark, any questions?
No, I'm struggling with internet, but no, nothing right now.
Eileen?
Just for historical perspective, when was the first year? Was it 2018 was the first time that you visited the locker room? Or was that, it was looked at earlier than that too, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was looked at earlier. And the last time it's been renovated was 1974, but it was cut back in 2006.
Okay.
From the budget.
Thank you.
And also just the last, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish that.
No, I was just going to say, the last thing I wanted to say was, this is just as important as any other space in the building. Really fostering the health and well-being of our children with this space, in addition to any other classroom. And it's a classroom too. And it's an expensive classroom, but.
Well, and I think, Joy, equally as much like when we visited, you see the wrestling mats stored in a room with other things. It's also protection of other assets. If you can get those mats to be stored properly up off the floor, well, the edges don't wear, the life cycle of some of the PE equipment is longer. So look, it's not a lot of savings, but there are little incremental offsets that'll happen over the years for this by doing it properly and having the proper amount of storage and the proper type of storage.
And I know I said it before, but it is utilized 345 days a year for athletics, PE, and health classes, and about 250 students a day use it. So, and that doesn't include, the abundant amount of visiting teams that use it on game days. So the weight room alone is utilized, all 4 seasons by every sport. So on average, each athlete spends about 2 hours a day in the weight room. So just to give you just a review of that, I know I've mentioned that before.
Brianna, anything?
I was just trying to catch my notes, but so you guys pay for porta potties basically, and you've done that for how? I'm sorry, what, Joy?
$1,000. It's about $3,000. It's about $3,000 a year.
Okay, and we've done that for how many years?
The last 40.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay. There you go. Thank you for that answer. Okay.
Brianna, just for context, there's no outdoor facilities for games or practices or anything like that. So that's why the porta johns are there, or for tennis, parks and rec, all those things that go on during the school day when kids are in school as well. So Porta johns get used by the school, public, everybody.
So we wouldn't eliminate them by the boys' locker room renovation. We'd still need them.
No,
We wouldn't need them anymore. If
You would get access.
Yeah. We
Got
probably won't be allowing access for the public during the school day for like tennis or something like that.
Perfect, thank you.
So
All right,
I don't
got it.
have, go ahead, I'm sorry.
All right, Glenn,
No, go ahead, Mark.
my audio is spotty. Do we have a plan moving forward to actually maintain this locker room since we couldn't maintain the last one? We can't keep equipment out of the the bathroom on the boys' side that's accessible from the outside. So we had to rent a porta john for apparently $1,500 for however many years you just said. What's the plan to maintain this one moving forward?
I don't understand the nature of the question, what the porta sands have to do with equipment storage. I'm just not understanding that.
So when you walk in from the outside, the
Yeah.
bathroom that is accessible basically from the outside before you get into the locker room.
Yep.
On the boys' side.
It's only on the boys' side, correct?
That bathroom that's shut down because you had an exhaust fan not working and whatever else may have not worked was a maintenance issue. And my understanding is you just store equipment in there now. And that's why we don't use it. So
Well, there's two parts to
you're
that,
paying-
yes.
if you're paying $3,000 a year for porta johns, cleaning and repairing that bathroom, you could have saved $1,500 a year.
Well, there's two parts to that. Title IX will allow you just to have a boys' toilet out there. We would actually be in trouble with the state if that only had male access and that females had to use the porta sands. Also, there's an ADA concern because they aren't accessible. Look, I'm not going to defend 20 years of mismanagement by and I won't say the Board of Education, but prior boards of education, prior superintendents, prior boards of finance. We can name everybody in the town as being complicit in why that bathroom and that toilet room hasn't been repaired and hasn't worked. As long as I've been here in the 21 years, that bathroom has never been in function or in functioning use.
So my question is, what is the plan moving forward? We don't want to leave this to future everyone in the town not maintaining it. So is there a plan? What does that cost look like to maintain this new $1.3 million locker room?
I mean, just like with anything else, we have strict policies and, through the facilities committee, we have, protocols that we follow and put in place to maintain our facilities. We go through school do reports and we meet with Dan monthly. And I mean,
well, it's a joy. I'm not sure if it helps if I step in for a second and just talk about some of the perspective. So to be clear about, clearly it's a significant amount of money that we're spending. If this was to go through at the 1 point whatever million dollars at this point. But to be clear, we're talking about separating the locker room from the public would not be able to walk into the bathrooms, use the bathrooms when we have, let's say, a football game after school and the evening. They're not walking to the locker room. So in terms of protection, we'll be able to seal those places off. As Paul mentioned before, there's some ways in communicating with the fire marshal and areas that we can actually seal off that allow, not seal off, but restrict access through doorways and things like that. So in terms of who would maintain the actual bathrooms, they would be maintained by our staff that we employ, that would be in there and doing that same sort of thing that they do for bathrooms in the building. It happens to be a bathroom in the building. We'd still be responsible for that. The public would not have access during the course of the school day. So or on the weekend, if there's no events and there's nothing going on, the public is not going to be able to access that bathroom and trash it. It'll be locked unless there's events, whether it be a private event from Park and Rec event that's done on the field at that point in time on a weekend for a lacrosse jamboree or something like that. Or if it's a soccer or field hockey game, it'll be unlocked and cleaned regularly, just like the rest of our facilities are clean. But there will be, the public will not be able to walk into the actual locker room. So in terms of the integrity of the $1.2 million investment, the majority of it is going to be sealed off from the rest of the public.
Now, Mark, I do better understand your question now, and I see your point. So in 1974, we expanded the school and renovated it when it became a high school. 20 years later, 1994 to 1995, we embarked on the start of a new renovation project. By the time it got legs and hit was 2001, 2002. But yeah, 20 years later, now we had a facility that wasn't functioning. So how do we know that 20 years from now that this asset is going to be maintained? And the only thing I really could offer on that is that in the last probably 6 years, the Board of Education has made some great strides, and the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen with supporting capital budgets. But the Board of Education has made some great strides with having more professional personnel maintain and fix our facilities than we had in the past. And, I think the addition of the maintenance mechanics, the electricians, those positions that were added to the Board of Education from the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen have made all the difference in the world in the upkeep and maintenance of our facilities. And you see them continuing to improve and not degrade now.
Thank you for the answer.
So Paul, have there been any material changes to the plan or Joy since we last spoke a year ago? And what is new and different that Tecton has now that they didn't have last year to validate this number?
Well, the biggest difference is that we added one fixture per exterior restroom. So the girls' side has 3 fixtures or 3 toilets. The boys' side has a toilet and 2 urinals. That's an expansion from what we saw last year. And we thought that expansion was necessary based on the number of porta stands we use. We're continuing to refine this for better storage and better use of some existing space. So as Joy and Steve Baldwin and I walked through on Saturday, there are some mechanical lofts in the weight room that we're going to recapture the underside for additional storage. We're going to continue to keep the same number of shower fixtures, but condense that to provide additional storage. A lot of this centers around getting equipment and items off the floor and into proper storage, and to do seasonal storage, much like you would in your home for the sports on a sport over sport season basis. Those are the major differences. A little bit on the mechanicals, we refined that scope. Some on the ceilings.
And the lockers too.
Yeah, and then when we walked through, we didn't see the need to replace all the lockers, which was an initial request. We thought that a substantial majority of them could be reused and or refurbished. And they cut down the amount of new lockers probably by about 70%. But that money went into some of the other refinements, like the expanded toilet rooms from the exterior.
Okay. All right, that's helpful. The biggest issue, I don't know about everybody, but the biggest issue that I personally had a year ago, or when the last time I looked at it, was it still felt that it was kind of a back of the envelope plan, a back of the envelope budget for a lot of money. And I just want to make sure that both the design phase and the money people who've been looking at it, it's more than back of the envelope. So the money people, Tecton, Bob, Marcia, whoever has looked at the budget side of it, Rosa, are confident that the budget side matches the plan side in terms of, review and all the protocols and procedures that needed to be followed for this number. I know it hasn't been put out to bid. We don't know the exact number, but for this stage, it's in better shape.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Paul.
That's okay, Rosa. The same estimators who worked on the new school estimate for Tecton for the architects also prepared this preliminary opinion of probable cost or construction cost. So we actually used a lot of the data we had from the new school and plugged some of those unit costs in for this estimate.
Okay.
Rosie, you want to add something?
No, I mean, I was gonna say, we've been working with Tecton with the new school, so similar to what Paul had mentioned, and because the facilities committee has been so deeply involved, and now is including the municipal building committee. Yeah, we're confident that this plan meets our needs, and this is the right price for it.
All right. Forgive me, I don't have all my paperwork in front of me. I mean, it's a lot of stuff. In the next 5 years, what are your next larger than $1 million capital requests?
I'm just gonna look up now. So in year 23-24, we have replaced the steam piping and steam terminal unit at the high school.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And what's the rough estimate on that?
Right now it's 1.1, so 1,107,000 actually. The year after that, so in 24-25, we have also at the high school replaced all domestic cold and hot water piping, sanitary and vent piping.
And that's over $1 million too?
Yeah, just over 1.1 as well.
Rosa, could you send that 10-year capital plan out to me? So I don't
Yeah,
have
it
to go
should
back
be
and
in
look for
your,
it?
yeah, it should be also in your budget binder if you have that in front of you.
I know, if you could just send it as its own document, I don't have to pour through
Sure.
it. if you
It
don't-
is, Rosa. It's in there. I got so much stuff laying around, I can't.
Yeah. Do you want me to keep going?
So basically, every year there's $1 million project ahead of us.
Yeah, and a lot of it at the high school, but we do have some big projects at the other buildings as well. Actually, I think, really the only other one, the big ticket one, but that's not for a few more years. It's still, 4 years off, is the replacement of the roof at Wisconsin.
Mhm. And Marcia, you've put all these into the model, all these, their 10-year plan?
No, the model didn't have everything individual. They're in the list. We make a list of what has been requested for the next 10 years, but the model was done in 2018. And because we had so many projects that needed to be done and limited money, we did it based on the money. So what we were trying to do was get up to $5 million of spending, cash spending per year, versus picking and choosing what projects.
Okay. How does this fit the 3-year bubble that we're looking at?
We've got a 3-year bubble that that we would finance this so that it makes a few of the years a little more bubbly. But anything that we do this year is going to slightly affect the 3-year bubble, because we're talking about the bubble. The model that we saw with the bubble was talking about a 30-year amortization. For the rest of it was $35 million or $38 million. And this, what we're talking about this year, will roughly increase it 10 to 15%.
So Board of Ed, looking at, and Marcia, we have a 3-year bubble on the financing, and Steve, please pipe in as well.
Sure.
On those next projects, if we approve this one, can any of those get pushed out a year to help us, or 2 to get through the bubble, or are we facing them right now that we got to deal with this?
Do we have, is Dan Caldwell by any chance on? Yeah, I think he is.
No, I don't think he is. I mean, he's.
Dan's on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am on, yes.
Dan, could you maybe comment on some of these other projects that we have? Some of the big ones, like replacing the domestic cold and hot water piping.
Sure, so,
Yeah, Dan, if you could comment on those specific to Glenn's question about the urgency, really, a year over year over year, is there a way to, delay some of these a year or something like that to help out with the bubble that they're referring to?
sure. So when we brought Tecton in to consult with us and help us with projects on the 10-year plan. We looked at projects that we already had on the horizon, as well as projects they were recommending. So we have certainly plugged them into the program, but I think on the major projects like that, we have some flexibility to move them forward and ahead, knowing at any time that there may be some maintenance costs involved with it as we push it out. But I don't think any of them are urgent, where we certainly should be able to look at that and see if we can work those projects back and forth to help, just as we're talking about tonight.
Yeah. Can I jump in real quick here? You know, a project like this would add about $36,000 a year in principal to our borrowing. So individual projects are not going to, in total, they will add to the amount of money we have to spend in debt during the bubble years. That's true. But individual projects are not going to increase it significantly. Where we are going to be able, and where we should look, I think, to address the bubble are two places, and we're doing that this year. Any new taxes that we get, we put in cash towards spending towards capital. Second, so for example, if Iroquois goes online, that'll be about, based on their estimate of the cost of their building, would be about $2 million a year in new taxes that we had not seen before. The second thing we can do is during those bubble years, and I don't like it, but we may need to do it to smooth the curve, as it were, is to lower the amount of cash we spend for capital items. That immediately affects the bubble. The borrowing affects it, but not because it's split out over 20 or 30 years. It doesn't have anywhere near the extrapolating effect that cash does. So if we were spending $5 million a year, let's say in 2023, and we lowered that by 2 million in 24, 25, 26 to get through the bubble, that would lower the bubble from, I believe it's just under 7 million down to 5 million, which is much more in keeping with how we want to have our taxes and our debt paid off. So I think we have to look at those things because they have the most direct effect on that bubble. And we're looking at that now, and we're redoing the 10-year plan as we speak. We're working on that. Does that make sense?
That makes good. I completely agree with everything you just said, Steve. And if so, and I also think, if we've, we maintain, just because there's a bubble doesn't mean we should shirk our responsibilities of maintaining our assets. If it's a $5 million, if we think maintenance CapEx is $5 million a year, it's $5 million a year, and not spending it is irresponsible, both short-term and long-term, bubble or not, in my mind. My question for this conversation, I guess, is, and I doubt Marcia or Steve know the answer to this, but if $5 million a year is the rough estimate for annual maintenance CapEx, what's the ratio of town, quote unquote, town assets to school assets that need to be maintained? And that's kind of should be the rough allocation of that $5 million.
Well, that's a good question. I don't have the answer to that. We can look at it. Most of our assets are in the schools.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
It's probably 70% of our assets, but we can look at that. A lot of towns, they split out in their budgets, CapEx for town, CapEx for schools. Maybe we should look at that, at least from a reporting standpoint, to just get a better idea of what we're doing.
Yep.
That's a good question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. I think we're done on the boys' locker room.
Yeah. So now, do you guys have any questions on any other capital projects before we sort of move away from capital?
I do not.
Let me see.
Oh, I've got one question. I know this is early days and we're talking about the America Recovers Act, the 1.9 trillion from the federal government. And the newspaper today reported $6.2 million coming to Brookfield. Johanna Hayes told me yesterday in a letter that Brookfield would get about 6 million on the town side and 793, I believe, on the school side. I don't want to get into a lot of detail about it, but one of the things that might be recoverable, it's mostly the intent of the act is one, recover from COVID, two, return our schools in town back to the condition they were in before the pandemic. And so that's primarily you're looking at money that one of the few things they're talking about in specifics is money that you spent that you didn't plan, that was unbudgeted. That money could cover that, let's say for PPE or whatever. So we've got a list of all of the grants that we're getting and this money, and I don't want to get into a lot of detail because there isn't a lot of detail about the America Recovers Act. But one thing I thought of, and they were talking about, it's kind of in effect hardening our systems. And in the budget, we have redoing the guidance wing air conditioning and things like that. So when we do that, does it behoove us to look at that and say, okay, do we need to put additional filtering in? Do we need to put different fans in? Do we need to, to protect the air? So it's something I think we'd want to look at. I don't know what's involved in that project, but those are the sorts of things that the funds from the federal government will pay for.
And just to answer Dan's question, that again, we do this budget based on, did the model based on $5 million a year of spending. That with, if you look at the capital requests, not a plan, just the requests, they're about $9 million a year. That and 43% is Board of Ed. I think that's lower than what Steve's thinking because I think he forgot to include in that we've got fire trucks and stuff in there.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Is
Those
there any
are
way we could,
curious about assets? So, but yep.
is there any way we could put together a committee for this
Definitely.
on the
Yeah.
capital side of things, Steve?
Yeah, remember I had suggested the year before last that we do a capital committee and discuss it in the fall. So everybody's gone through every capital item. And when it goes to the boards, we know what they are, what we think they're going to cost, and the priority of them. And everybody has a comfort level there. And then when we get to this point, we're just fitting them into the budget as needed, and keeping the tax increases reasonable. I would be very much in favor of doing that.
So how do we make that happen?
We just decide to create a committee.
There are best practices on it and we can share some of that.
I mean, Rosa, would you be open to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. And, I think it would be a nice way to sort of, bridge, what our facilities committee is doing with the town side. So yeah, that's a great idea.
And Glenn, I would suggest maybe one or two people from each board sit on that along with, Joy would obviously be there and just go through every capital project and set up a plan.
I think so.
Does that make sense, Glenn?
To me, it does. I mean, because we're sitting here trying to justify priorities on all sides.
Right.
And we're looking at it like, and I'm not saying anything bad, but the Board of Ed has their priorities, the town has their priorities, and we need to mold it to a town priority. How's that?
Mhm.
Like a full town, I mean, Board of Ed and Selectmen side.
Yep. Okay, we'll do that.
All right. Any other questions from our side on capital?
I just have one more. I apologize. The paving and concrete budget at both the high school and the middle school originally was 300 down to 150 at the high school and 100 down to 0 at the middle school. So what was the original use and what's been cut and what's going to be paved?
Well, I made those cuts. I've been to both facilities, and again, it was based on the prioritization of the school board and the facilities committee and trying to fit it into our budget. It's not a great thing that I did or wanted to do, but it's, again, priorities.
And if I can add to that on the BOE side, we had looked, paving is kind of a never ending thing at our facilities. if we phase it and stage it, it's easier to maintain as we go along. But we were able to at Wiskaner School last year because we had the funds available to go a little further than we anticipated with some sidewalks. We developed a bus loop, which has really been beneficial in coming back to school with the additional parent drop off and busing. So we have a section there that, I had really hoped we'd be able to get paved this year. We were fortunate through the winter. We've been able to maintain the area that was the sub base is capped off with millings, and Park and Rec has done a good job at keeping that in good condition through the winter, keeping it safe for foot traffic on it and bus traffic as well. And then the high school, we were looking to tackle the main parking area in front of the building this coming year with the budget approval. And if anybody pulls through there, you'll see many years of patching and projects where there are cuts and a variety of quality of paving repairs in there. So those were the two things we were looking to do this year: is finish the bus lane at Wiskaner and take on the main parking lot at the high school.
Thanks.
Sorry, can I ask one other capital question? For the guidance wing rooftop AC, the notes in the binder say that it's based on when the BHS roof was replaced. How was that? How many years ago? How accurate is that estimate, the 325?
I'm sorry, which item? Can you say that again, Eileen?
The first one, the replace the guidance wing and rooftop AC. Yeah. The first item on the education side, high school capital.
Sure. So we used square footage. We used numbers based on that guidance section being an alternate that wasn't completed at that time. Okay. And then as Ken Post and I reviewed, we did speak with a roofing contractor that has done some maintenance for us, just looking at square foot pricing okay. on those units. So I think they're close, but they're not dead on at this point.
Okay, I mean, if that's been a little more updated, even if in general from 2017, that's good.
It has been updated, yes.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Okay, so Dan, we were saying, and Paul, maybe, is Paul still on? That this was originally part of the 2005 high school renovation, and it was an additional item that did not get completed?
No, this was part of 2000, and I think it's 15, 16 project, which was the roofing over the gymnasiums. And this was alternate one of that project. But just prior to that, to my understanding, before I came on, that just prior to that, we had to do the auditorium roof, and perhaps some of the funding was diverted from that project. And that's my understanding, but it's based on casual conversations.
Yeah, my point was, I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't clear, is I thought Eileen's question was, when was the last time this roof was done? And I think it was a very long time ago.
No, it was a question about when the note in the binder said that it was based on based on an estimate from when the BHS roof was replaced. I just wanted to make sure that that estimate was current enough to be working with.
Any other questions on capital? Okay, let's move on to operating.
All right. So I just wanted to remind everybody and anybody that might be watching this back, we don't have a formal presentation prepared. We did our formal presentation on February 3rd. So I do this is going to be more of like an open discussion, but we do have a couple of updates to share with you as promised. We have a few placeholders or estimates in the budget, and as we get firm numbers on those, they'll be reported to you. So we do have 2 updates, although nothing too groundbreaking. One of the software providers gave us a firm number that was actually $20 under budget, not 20,000, unfortunately, but $20. And the WPCA gave us a firm quote for next year's rates, which will be $2,357 higher than budgeted. And unfortunately, this is reflecting over a 5% increase in their rates. So that's an unfortunate little hit for us as well. In terms of the $140,000 cut that we have received from the Board of Selectmen, to my understanding, the sort of rationale was mainly because there was awareness of the ESSER 2 grant, which was going to be coming our way. So we do, just to sort of clarify and explain a little bit about that grant, we do stand to receive $328,000 from the ESSER 2 grant. It's designed to specifically help districts tackle learning loss stemming from the pandemic. So these are funds that are going to be distributed and used over the next 2.5 years. So Dr. Brilla has met with his team of instructional leaders to design a plan that would provide the best use of these funds for students. And several of our key investments that were in our budget met the grant criteria. So we'd like to implement them as soon as possible so that students can start utilizing them right away. So the following 3 items we feel are best funded through the grant, and that could also reduce next year's budget. So the first item is a new investment that we had listed, which is the summer school. That would begin this summer, totals $55,000. Technology professional development for teachers and staff at $15,000, and the part-time math tutor at center school, and that would be $25,000. So a total of $96,000 we feel we could reduce next year's budget because we can safely fund those particular items with the ESSER 2 grant. I just want to, it's important for me to state that the investments that we still need to make that address needs that we recognized prior to the pandemic, like the district TESOL teacher, the BHS math interventionist, the speech and language teacher at the high school, classroom library books, and a technology teacher. Those are just some of the things that we still need to address. And the grant will help us reduce the budget, the 21-22 budget, but it can't be used to fully replace the $140,000 reduction that's currently on the table. So we are requesting that the Board of Finance consider restoring the $44,000 to the 21-22 budget so that we can continue with our plan to make those key investments. And that's pretty much the update. So I didn't receive any questions prior to this meeting, but I would like to open it up for, questions that may have sprung up since then.
Rosa,
I have a question
how much were you looking for back? I had a blip.
44,000 would make us whole again.
Thank you.
Before we get into questions, I want to clarify for the people at home that the Board of Ed supplied the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen with a 3-page list of questions that they asked on each line item, and supplied us with the responses that came back from the superintendent. So a lot of this meeting tonight, the questions that we're going to be asked by us and by Steve, I'll speak for you and you can chime in, that you were going to ask had been pre-asked and we had got the information back, correct?
Absolutely. It was very comprehensive.
So that's why we're having the meeting like we're having tonight. The line items have gone through, a lot of questions have been asked and presented to us, correct?
That's correct. And if anybody wants to see that, we have it, right?
Yes.
I'll also add, Mr. Rooney, that we had a very detailed process, and as part of that process, we had a representative from the Board of Finance with us every step of the way, and Mrs. Marion, our town controller, every step of the way. So not only did we ask a lot of questions, but through the process, both Eileen and Marcia had a lot of chance to ask questions. So it was very, very open and transparent, tried to work really hard to make sure that it was collaborative. So,
right. I agree with that, Bob. And that's why I'm trying to let the town know that a lot of work was done in the background, and not just here.
Yep, I agree with you. Then thank you for clarifying that.
And
Okay.
Mr. Briel, Dr. Briel put out a little message here that it's all available on the district website, questions and answers.
Oh, cool.
All right, so
Thank
Board
you,
of
Mark.
Finance,
It's all posted there for you.
any questions? Eileen? No, hearing none. Brianna? I'll ask one. I
I
mean,
have a question.
go ahead.
Sorry, you directed it towards Eileen, but I had a question. And it's more, I guess, this is towards Marcia. Should we be, if you want the 44K, is that a net amount? So should we, should the request not be to add back in the full 140K and also add in 96K of revenue with the ESSER grant? Or is the ESSER grant somehow, that way we're at least accounting for those programs within the budget? Shouldn't that be the way to look at it?
Well, let me answer that. Yeah, if we use the 96K from the ESSER grant, that's going to go away. So it would have to be added if we kept those programs to next year's budget. So you could look at it that way, Ricky. The cut is 140. We do have a temporary one-time offset with the ESSER grant, but it would need to go back. Does that answer your question?
Well, right, but the expenditures that we should be adding back in are 140,000. And then we need to also add in 96K of revenue with the ESSER grant so that the net is 44K. But I just want to clarify that the expenditures are still going to go up 140,000 per this request.
I'd like to clarify something. The grant funds have to be accounted for separately from the general fund.
Got it. Okay.
So those expenses would have to come out of the operating budget and go into a separate grant budget.
Correct.
Okay, cool. That was the clarification I needed. Thank you.
Yep.
So wait, let's clarify that a little further. The money that was granted to us was 328,000 that we can use over 2 years, correct?
Yes.
That's correct.
So we wouldn't feel the effect if the summer program was a viable program and wanted to be kept because it was successful. We wouldn't feel the effect until year 3 to our true operating budget when you incorporated it into the umbrella.
Well, not exactly. So,
Okay.
So Dr. Brill, you could probably maybe jump in here and sort of, so it's not every year that we will use the grant money to fund the exact same things every year. Dr. Brill has a plan for years 2 and beyond. So maybe you can help clarify that a little bit.
Sure, and that's a great question because we did talk about, is it something we can do for the summer program, summer 2 and summer 3, because we actually could expend these funds through September of 2023, Glenn. What we were looking at is, while we probably, to be very candid, could write the grant in such a way that we might be able to get the second summer and the third summer covered, we frankly want to get summer school as a staple eventually, which would be the summer of 22, into our operating budget. But for this year, because Brookfield's never had a regular ed summer school program, we do have an extended school year for students with special needs, but we've never had a regular education intervention summer school program for the elementary schools. So it's really something we need, but it's something that really should be in the operational budget. And that's why we planned it out and had talked about this for a couple of years, but really brought it forward full bore this year to the Board of Ed, and finally through the adopted budget to Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance. We could use the ESSER funds specifically for summer school as a supplement for this first year. But I think we're riding the edge, frankly, going further with that. And we want to use the funds for some other uplifting and programmatic issues that we see fit for the students going forward that meet the requirements of the grant.
So how does that cascade and roll forward into the operating budget? If we use, let's say, this 100,000 each of the next 3 years, year 3, now if you incorporated $300,000 of extra costs into your operating budget, each program or enhancement that you introduce, is it to introduce it to become a permanent process into the schools, So now you're taking up $100,000 of your investment money each of the next few years down the road.
We don't want to have a grant cliff. Some things in a year or two would likely be gone. Other things we would fold in and incorporate into the operating budget as part of our program going forward. Again, as you illustrated earlier, it depends on of those programs.
But John, you're saying summer school is something we want to do every year.
Summer
So
school
even
is
5 years from now, we want to have that expense, we want to have that program,
Correct.
even when the grant is gone.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions, Mark?
Not at this time.
Anybody else on the Board of Finance have a question?
Did I miss what year 2 and year 3 was, what you were thinking for the grant? Or did you just say you weren't sure, but you were going to roll it? It just definitely wasn't including
Oh,
summer
so
school.
Brianna, we actually talked about that at our finance committee meeting, and they've kind of got some high level visions of what the 3-year plan would look like. And we asked Dr. Burrill to bring back a full view of where they think this will be used over time. I mean, some of the decisions will be made out ahead of us, but some of them, they've got some ideas, but they need to flesh out the ideas before we actually lay out the whole use of this ESSER grant. It's just the decisions haven't been taken yet.
Okay, that's fine. I was just curious. That's all.
Yeah. No, I would expect in the next months we'll start fleshing some of that out, right? But because some of the, especially the year 2 and year 3, we have some time to actually flesh out what, some of this, money could be really used for.
Yeah, and I think without going too deep, Mr. Dunn mentioned it earlier in the meeting. I thank you, Bob, for that. He talked about more federal stimulus rescue money coming into the town to the tune of, I don't know, it was quite a bit there, Steve, whatever the figure was that you got from Representative Hayes. We're getting the similar information regarding the Board of Education side, and it's just over $800,000 is a figure we keep hearing. That would be in addition to this $328,000. So we have no guidance on that yet and how that could be used. When we know, of course, we'll be having these public conversations and talking about that and developing a plan. And it likely will be a multi-year plan from what I understand.
I agree. And the details on it are so amorphous right now. You can't assign this money to any, especially on the school side, to any specific project.
It's like magic money.
Yeah.
All right. No questions from anybody else? All right. As a group, before we're going to deliberate next week on the budget, that's our week of deliberations. We understand the Board of Selectmen made a move of $140,000 reduction, of which we talked about tonight. 90-something thousand of that is hopefully covered under the ESSER grant, leaving you $44,000 shy. Can you go through one last time, together, not as a group, but even individually, to see anywhere where some of that could be picked up or not be picked up, that it's a little bit less? I know you've gone through it 100 times. I get it. I understand it. But I mean, if you could give it one last look before we deliberate and maybe get back to us by Wednesday of next week, it would be appreciated.
Yep, we can take another look.
I know it's beating, I understand it, but I mean, it would be nice, one last chance to see if something pops out, to see if something was, slightly missed. I know there's not going to be a big bucket. It isn't there. I get it.
Glenn, I don't want to put any extra pressure on them, but I think we need it by Tuesday of next week so we could really get into deliberations.
Okay. Tuesday. I appreciate that. And I understand it might not be there. We've worked well together as a group, this year, and I just would like to make the best decisions possible as our group can do.
Understood. Sounds
All
good.
right. Marcia, you have any questions before we go?
I do not.
Steve?
No, thank you.
Anybody, who else is on from your board? Is anybody else on?
No, no, I thought they were, but they're not here, so we're good.
There's no other questions from the Board of Finance. All right. Hearing none, let's move on to public comment. Or any other budget discussions from my board. Hearing none, let's move on to public comment. Anyone have public comment? All right, well, I think we're ready to make a motion to adjourn. I appreciate all your support from the Board of Ed and Stephen Marshall, your backup support as well. I think this is one of the smoothest Board of Ed, Board of Finance meetings we had in a long time, and it's appreciated. So Rosa, you want to head and end with a comment?
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, it definitely was very smooth, and we appreciate your time tonight. And yeah, we still have a little while to go, so look forward to more conversations like these. Would you mind if I adjourn the Board of Ed meeting?
Before you do adjourn, and I slighted, does any Board of Ed member want to speak, you know, anything before we adjourn to address us?
I'll just reiterate it again. It's been a great working partnership over the last couple of months, and I want to thank everybody who's on this call. And it's one of the tightest budgets we've ever put forward.
Thank you. Anybody else on the Board of Ed? Here's your chance.
And I'd like to thank everybody and just put in a final comment and thank the Finance Committee on the Board of Ed side with all the help from Eileen and Marcia being involved. That Budget Development Committee action that we took over 2 months after my initial proposal in early December really made a difference this year. It's something I think we talked about for a couple of years previous, but we really put into action, and it made a huge difference for everyone, as we can see manifesting this evening. And I think similarly from your idea and the fact that we chatted about it a little bit last night regarding a capital committee, I think it'll serve the same purpose. So I think this is the collaboration we continue to move toward and evolve as a team that does this annually. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, nobody else? Going once, going twice. Mark, close us out. Or Rosa, you can close out your group first. How's that?
Okay, so without objection, the Board of Ed meeting is adjourned.
Steve, you want to close out your meeting because you opened it?
Yeah, well, I opened it, but it's not a meeting, but I adjourn our meeting also.
Mark, you bringing us home? Lost Mark?
He doesn't look connected.
I'll motion to adjourn.
I'll second it. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.